The connection between coronavirus, the Red Heifer, and Jewish purity laws. I've been wanting to write a commentary of how the various rabbis are addressing the reason behind the coronavirus pandemic. I might still do that, but for fear of being censored, since this also ends up on YouTube, I want to focus first on what's not being talked about that isn't related to going against the WHO or CDC. The laws of purity and impurity. How impurity is spread. Purity, or Taharah, and impurity or Tumah, can directly be related to viruses and bacteria. Impurity is spread exactly like germs. Just as when a woman is unclean due to her monthly cycle, everywhere she sits or lays becomes impure. And how anyone who touches that impure place also becomes impure. So too with how bacteria and viruses are spread. The problem with purity laws today. The Talmud never discusses issues of purity except for Niddah as it relates to when a woman has her period, and family purity, since the main laws of purity had to do with the priests and the temple. The Mishnah, however, is replete with all these laws. The problem is, since all religious Jews only study the Talmud, these other laws, and therefore the overall concept of purity has been forgotten and thought no longer applicable. The mainstream view among Rishonim and non-Kabbalistic authorities is that one is permitted to become impure, except on those occasions when one must visit the temple, or touch holy objects, and thus there is no obligation to attempt to remain pure. As an example, it is not only permitted but a mitzvah to tend to a dead person, even though this causes impurity, as stated in the Mishnah Torah, Tumah Keli in chapter 16 verses 8 to 9. Some rabbis advocated abstaining from an object made impure by a Niddah, while the Habit, Lubavitcher Rebbe Rabbi Menachem Schneerson discouraged abstaining from any object made impure by a menstruating woman in modern times, with the exception for unique individuals. Whatever that means. This is wrong. While yes, you still have to tend to a dead person, you don't stop becoming impure just because there is no temple or red heifer. Menstrual blood does contain bacteria. I would assume these laws were in place due to not always being able to contain the blood and therefore leaking into clothes and surfaces. Likewise, semen also contains bacteria. So these purity laws deal with the practical aspects of spreading germs. It does in fact apply both to a physical uncleanness and spiritual uncleanness. They apply to everyone whether there is a temple or not. If the rabbis would have recognized this in the beginning, they could have taken precautions with this virus by disinfecting the shuls and yeshivot and required people to wash with soap before entering. Because without the temple, the synagogue is representative of God's house, and we should all be pure when entering. Instead, they only focused on prayer and learning to protect them, which doesn't hurt, but should have been used in addition to other purity measures. And no, just reciting Torah passages talking about plagues does not stop a plague. You must do what the Torah says. They should have known better. Hopefully now they understand and have learned their lesson, and going forward will put more thought into it to avoid more sickness and deaths. How this relates to the red heifer. Since the destruction of the temple, and no red heifer, the same concept applies. Not only us, but everything we touch has become impure from contact with the dead. So looking at all that was done to mass disinfect communal areas such as buses, airports, planes, schools and playgrounds, this is a vision of how we would need to purify everything with the red heifer, since literally everything we touch is impure. So if there is one benefit of this pandemic, I would like to view it as preparation as to what life would be like if we had the red heifer. Death and disease make you impure. There are several ways that the Torah says you can become impure. What they all seem to have in common is that they all involve death. Death of humans, death of animals, clean and unclean, and the death of potential humans, menstruation and semen. There is also impurity due to disease known as Taharah. This is something that can be visibly seen by a priest and usually deals with the skin, clothes, or house. But what about bacteria or viruses that can't be seen? I can only find something close to fungus or mold, which again is something that can be seen. The secret of how death makes you impure. Death involves the breakdown of cells, that releases bacteria, and presumably viruses, into the air. So, inherent in the process of purification, is the cleansing of bacteria. It has been recently reported that the coronavirus can be transmitted by a corpse. We know that the handling of dead animals can cause sickness. The health guidelines today acknowledge this fact, and that's why you are not advised to touch a dead animal with your bare hands and take other precautions such as washing your hands, hair and clothes after. Sound familiar? That's how the Torah says to purify yourself. How much more so with a dead human? It is believed that unless that person has a contagious disease, they pose no health risk. This is also wrong, as it spreads a spiritual impurity. The spiritual side to impurity. The impurity from contact with the dead is no different than other forms of impurity. It's spread the same way, it's just cleansed in a different way than just showering and washing clothes. While some sources of impurity only require washing oneself and clothes for that day, others require waiting 7 days and/or offering a sacrifice. The difference is in the spiritual aspect, realm. The purification by the Red Heifer specifically addresses not only the practical impurity, but also the spiritual aspect, realm, but I will not address this here. That will have to be for another video. The use of soap for purification. Did the ancient Israelites use soap? There are only 3 references in the Tanakh alluding to soap. One in Jeremiah chapter 2 verse 22, which says, "Even if you were to wash with niter and use much soap, your iniquity has become a stain before me." One in Malachi chapter 3 verse 2, which says, "For he will be like the smelter's fire and like the launderer's soap." It's referring to the prophet Elijah. And one in Job chapter 9 verse 30, which says, "Though I would wash myself in melted snow and I would cleanse my hands with soap." I cannot find any clear answer as to how it was used or what was used as soap. I often wondered why the Torah only mentions washing in water and doesn't mention using soap. Could it be that it was just understood just as today? Do we say we took a shower with soap? Was it only used by the priests, or everyone? Was it only used to wash clothes but not the body or hands? Maybe this is the reason why we think it wasn't used, but there are extra biblical sources to look to for answers. The use of soap for medicine. Ancient Egyptians used soap for medicinal purposes. The Ebers Papyrus, Egypt, 1550 BC, refers to medicinal use of soap. These texts suggest that ancient Egyptians combined both animal and plant oils with alkaline salts to create a substance used for treating sores, skin ailments as well as washing. The Israelites may have used the ashes from certain plants mixed with oil or fat for the same purposes. The use of plants and trees as medicine. Sefer Refuot, the Book of Medicines, also known as Sefer Asaph, is the earliest known medical book written in Hebrew. Attributed or dedicated to possibly a Byzantine Jew, this is of course much later than the Torah, but it shows that plant-based natural medicine was not unheard of or frowned upon, unlike today, within Jewish religious culture. The use of spices in the Torah to cure plagues. Numbers chapter 17 verse 11 describes using the temple incense that included frankincense to cure a plague. Frankincense is known to be good for the respiratory system. Some Haredim have already used it with success for the coronavirus. In conclusion, the point of all this is to show that these laws of purity and rituals had a real practical use and not just to smell good or for superstition. When we can realize this, the temple service will start to make sense, and we can begin to long for it to return along with the rest of the purity laws such as the Red Heifer, as well as incorporating it into our daily life. Disclaimer: I am not advocating using only these methods as a cure for coronavirus. Please follow all the health guidelines.